Hey everybody, this is Beth Wilson, Pulaski County Horticulture Agent, and we are on the second part of growing great tomatoes. Part one was about, where to grow them, how to grow them, some of the watering things we have to do, the fertility, some varieties, but we didn't talk anything about some of the challenges that we have, and we have quite a few challenges with tomatoes, so that's what we're going to talk about today. Hope some of you will follow me on Facebook at Pulaski County Horticulture. I'm also on Twitter at Hort Agent Beth, and also on Instagram at KY Plants. All right, so you've got your garden planted, you got tomatoes on the vine, things are looking good, and then suddenly you start to have problems. So let's talk about a number of those problems. First of all, insects. Stink bugs are a common problem of tomatoes in Kentucky. We have many different types of stink bugs. Some are actually beneficials, but there are some that are plant pests as well. They look like, and they have piercing, sucking mouth parts, and this is the kind of damage they do on the tomato. They stick their mouth parts in. Every place you see a little white spot there is where the stink bug stuck his mouth part and withdrew contents of the cells. And on the outside it looks bad, but also on the interior it looks a little weird too, with those white spots underneath the skin. That's pretty common. We also have corn earworms, which is also tomato fruitworm. It's the same insect, it just attacks tomatoes, so we call it something different. These will usually enter at the calyx near the stem scar of the tomato, and it just makes a huge mess of things. So we want to keep an eye out for that one. Aphids can be a problem. Aphids are fairly small, but you can see them without a lens or anything. They tend to like to gather on the undersides of leaves. They tend to like the new succulent growth the best. They have a mouth part sort of like the stink bug, whereas they insert their mouth part into the plant and withdraw sap out of the plant. The leaves are usually sometimes curled under, that kind of thing. They can be hiding, but you really have to look at them because they're going to be underneath on the undersides of the leaf. Whiteflies can sometimes be a problem. What will usually happen is if you have an infestation and you brush by, you'll see these little white flies kind of come out from around the plant. They suck plant juices as well, so you might see some stippling or again some curling of the leaves. They generally like to hide on the undersides as well, so unless you're just hitting the plants and going by them, they won't flutter up. They'll kind of stay stationary. Cholera potato beetle can be a pretty bad problem on tomatoes. They like potatoes a whole lot more, and even some weed species, but the middle picture there is the larvae of the adult, which is in the upper right hand corner. The larvae actually does a whole lot of damage. They are voracious eaters, and they can decimate your plants pretty quick. If you see these eggs on the lower left, that might be something to kind of scout for, and you can squish those eggs before they actually hatch and become the voracious larval eaters. And this is blister beetle. Blister beetles are a late season pest, not every year. It seems like when they do come, they come in droves though, and they can defoliate plants. They are called blister beetles for a reason, so don't handle them. They can hurt you. And the only time I've really seen a bad infestation has been on eggplant of all things, and it was later in the season. And cutworms can be a problem on newly planted seedlings. Of course, this is a corn plant. In my experience, I've not really had a whole lot of problems with it, but if you see something happen at the base of the plant where it enters the soil, cut off like that, you may have cutworm problems, so you may have to address that. Flea beetles are fairly common on tomato. They're also very common on potato, probably most common on potatoes. But they are called flea beetles because they kind of hop if you disturb them. Not really hop, but it just kind of reminds you of a flea. And they will eat these teeny tiny holes in the leaves can do some damage. A lot of times they don't do enough damage to really warrant anything, any control measures, but they're out there and they may be a problem. And then we have hornworms. Hornworms are these big, fleshy caterpillars that get on all solanaceous crops like tobacco, especially, and tomatoes, even on pepper. And they are leaf eaters. They will chew very large holes in the leaf. They can defoliate a plant if there's enough of them. So this can be a bad one. And if you ever see a hornworm that looks like this, though, he is basically dead. This hornworm is with these little cocoons popping out of his body. He is, by all intents and purposes, he is dead. He just doesn't really know it yet. But these are the cocoons of a beneficial wasp, a parasitic wasp that goes around and completes their life cycle on these pests, caterpillars that we think are pests. So leave this where it is, because what'll happen is that these cocoons will hatch out more of these little wasps, and you're getting more beneficial insects out there. So leave this alone. This hornworm is no longer feeding. And then we have spider mites. Spider mites are extremely small. You will need a hand lens to see them. The picture on the left would be an extreme infestation of them. Rarely do you see the webbing. They have a very fine webbing, but it's rare to see the webbing. This is just really bad. Over on the right, that was the typical damage you would see. This stippling of the foliage. Spider mites do some similar damage as aphids, except they actually withdraw the contents from a cell. When they stick their mouth part in, they actually withdraw cell contents. So you get this bleached appearance on the upper side of the leaves with some curling possibly. They're going to be usually on the undersides of the leaves again, and they will be, like I said, extremely small. So you'll want to get a lens out and take a look. Look like, but this is highly magnified. The egg is on the upper right hand there. If you see the little eggs, you know they're there, even if you never see an adult. But these can be extremely bad. Generally, if it's hot and dry, that's when these will be most problematic. So now let's go over some diseases and other disorders that tomatoes get. This is probably the number one call that I get on tomatoes is something called blossom end rot, and it is a rot that occurs on the bottom where the blossom was. It is hard and crusty. It's not soft and decaying or anything like that. The tomatoes are edible. It's just very problematic. This is a calcium deficiency. However, in Kentucky soils, we rarely have calcium deficiencies. So what this comes down to is our delivery system to getting the calcium from the soil into the plant. And what is that? That's water. We generally do not water enough when we've got lots of foliage and lots of fruit hanging on the vine. And to move that calcium into the plant, you've got to keep the soil moist. So watering sometimes twice a day in the summer if it's extremely hot, windy, dry, that kind of thing. And we always like to water at the base, of course. We don't like to overhead irrigate because that drives these diseases. This is not a disease, this is a disorder. But we do want to provide water, but we don't want to do it in a fashion that will exacerbate diseases, which do rely on free water on the foliage. Early blight is our number one fungal disease. This is textbook. You will see this if you have this disease. It will have this target appearance, concentric rings. It will usually hit on the lower foliage first and then kind of work its way up the plant. It's called early blight for a reason. It can hit early. And the way that we can really get around this is to provide some sort of mulch around the plants, which prevents rain splash from splashing soil onto the lower leaves. That's how it gets started. And then once it gets started, it's very hard to stop. You'll have to use fungicides. But we can do a lot of things to prevent this, mainly the mulch around it and making sure that our tomatoes are situated in a place where they're getting plenty of airflow and they're not planted too closely together. and so that it prevents good airflow. But this, and of course, we do have some fungicides that can take care of this as well. Fusarium and Verticilium wilts are soil-borne fungal pathogens. You don't know you have that until you plant a susceptible plant. Tomatoes are a susceptible plant. The best way around this problem is to only, if you have a diseased plant and when you bring it to our office and it gets diagnosed with one of these wilts, the best thing you can do after that is just basically grow plants, only grow plants that have these wilt resistance built into the plant, and there are plenty of them. So don't think it's impossible. There are plenty of varieties that you can use in a home garden that have good resistance to these two diseases. Septoria is very common and usually comes in conjunction with early blight, and it kind of follows the same sort of pattern. It hits on the lower foliage first and then kind of works its way up. And like I said, you will see both early blight and Septoria on the same leaf. Bacterial canker. So this one is a bacterial disease, not a fungal disease. Bacterial canker is becoming more and more common in tomatoes, even in home gardens, especially in commercial plantings, but also in home gardens. There's a number of different ways it looks. You can see what the foliage looks like. You will see some halos. You'll see browning around the edges of the leaf with a kind of a yellow border sometimes. The leaf will curl, and that's an indication that with those all in combination, that could tell you that you have bacterial canker. But more importantly, it will get systemic and go into the stem. And when you cut open the stem, sometimes you'll see that the pith is kind of rotted out and pitted. So the only way to get rid of this is to pull the plants out. If you've got plants that look like this, you need to rogue them out. The only spray that we have for bacterial problems is really copper, a fixed copper product, and they're not perfect. They're not perfect, but we need to make sure we're planting good seed, disease-free seed, and again, just doing all those things that to help the plant dry off quickly so that this disease can't get started. Late blight is a fungal disease. We're back to fungal diseases, but this one is not nearly as important. In 20 years of doing extension work, I've only seen this be a real problem once or twice. It will happen usually at the end of the growing season when, or if we have a cool spell or maybe a long spring where it stays really cool and wet. If it's cool and wet, this is when this disease takes off. If it's hot, it will not be a problem, but the cool is what drives this disease. And it hits the top of the plant first, and it will have this appearance to the leaves, and it will get on the fruit and make them unmarketable, unedible. Not a good thing to happen. And then again, this is another soil-borne disease. It's called southern stem blight, and your plants will just basically wilt, and then when you look at the base, you'll see this fungal mass as the plant enters the soil. This is generally not much of a problem. You'll have to rotate out. As far as I know, we don't have any southern stem blight resistant tomatoes, but as long as you can maybe move the tomatoes to a different part of the garden or something, maybe that will help. And again, you'll have to rogue these out. You cannot cure this. You'll have to pull them out and hope for the best next year. Let's go over some, we just have a few viral diseases, but they can be really weird. This one is tomato spotted leaf wilt virus. Viruses are very strange. They can do very weird things to the leaves and the fruit. We have tobacco mosaic, we have tomato mosaic, and we also have a cucumber viral disease as well. So they can be manifested in a number of ways. If you have something that looks off, I would recommend you bring it to the extension office and get it diagnosed. And some other things that happen that kind of look weird is different herbicides and how they affect tomatoes. The bigger picture there is 2,4-D injury. 2,4-D is a very common herbicide that's used in home lawns, and even corn growers use it to take care of broadleaf weeds. It can move on air currents very, very easily. It drifts like mad. So if you're downwind from a big farm operation, or your neighbor's getting some herbicide sprayed on their lawn, you may have this injury show up. It's very strange looking, and it will stunt your plants so bad it's not worth keeping them. The lower right corner is another one that we see quite a bit, and that's glyphosate injury. That's Roundup, but generically it's glyphosate, and it's got a very unique appearance in how the injury looks on the plant. If you have this kind of injury, again, it will stunt the plant, maybe not kill it, but would you want to eat the tomatoes from this plant? I would not, because the glyphosate does go systemic, and you don't know where it's going to end up. Is it going to end up in the roots, or is it going to end up in the tomato, or is it going to end up in some leaves? We don't know, so I would avoid eating that. If you have walnut trees on your property, we want to be sure not to plant tomatoes near walnuts. Walnuts' roots exude a substance called juglone, which can basically kill your tomato plants, as indicated in this picture. So just be aware of that. I want to put one slide in here about pesticides. We've talked a little bit about pesticides, nothing specific, but for any pesticide, whether it be an insecticide, a fungicide, a bactericide, whatever it may be, the label is the law, and I highly encourage you to read all the instructions before applying the product, whatever it may be. I want you to be sure to obey all the pre-harvest intervals. Those are the days you have to wait between the time you spray and the time that you can harvest. Again, just if you read the label, it will talk about your personal protective equipment. So wear that appropriate clothing. Always handle gloves when you're handling these pesticides. And when you look at the Funginil label, which is one of a very common fungicide that we use on lots of vegetables, it just says this thing says for use on vegetables, fruit, trees, flowers, shrubs, and trees. Well, it could be that some vegetables are excluded and some fruits are excluded. Anything that you're going to eat, you really need to make sure that you read the label and make sure that crop that you're going to spray it on is on the label and it's okay to use. So please do yourself a favor and be safe when you're applying these pesticides. And for any questions during the season, please email me. My email is very simple. It's my name, beth.wilson@uky.edu. You can message me on Facebook at the Pulaski County Horticulture Facebook page. You can also call the office. The office number is on our website, which is Pulaski County Extension. Be sure to look at the Kentucky page, not the Arkansas page or the Pennsylvania page. So with that, I just wish you the best of luck this growing season, and please give me a holler if you need anything. Thank you.